The people today would find it hard to believe that halfway through the 20th century in the land of the free, players who might be qualified to play in our national pastime were not permitted to play because of the pigmentation of their skin. Well, actually, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I had a normal boyhood. We played a lot of ball in the streets at that time. 1929 happened, and we lost everything. At that time in New York, if you weren't some kind of ist, communist, socialist, questioning the workings of capitalism, you were considered sort of brain dead.
Lester Rodney was a 25-year-old aspiring journalist when he was hired to create a sports page for the Daily Worker, New York's Communist Party newspaper. With the freedom to explore social issues of the day, Rodney quickly made breaking the color barrier in baseball his signature issue. Rodney wasn't the only journalist calling for an end to baseball segregation, but nobody beat the drum louder than Lester Rodney.
Here I am writing about baseball, and I see some of the great Negro League teams playing. I know how good Josh Gibson is, for instance, the greatest catcher who ever put on a uniform, by the way. The point was I felt an immediate vacuum in baseball, that nobody is addressing this thing.
Outlawed by baseball, the crime of the big leagues. One of the most sordid stories in American sports. Though they win laurels for America in the Olympics, though they have proven themselves outstanding baseball stars, Negroes have been placed beyond the pale of the American and National Leagues. Read the truth about this carefully laid conspiracy. Beginning next Sunday, the Daily Worker will rip the veil from the crime of the big leagues, naming names, giving facts, sparing none of the most sacred figures in baseball's officialdom. August 10th, 1936.
A lot of people don't even know how good these players are, that they're good enough to play. And the next thing we're to do is challenge baseball's big shots. Judge Landis, Ford Frick, Will Harridge, the presidents of the National American League. And we did that. We said, is there a written ban against Negro? That was the operative word then. A hem and a haw and say, no, there's no written ban, but it's up to the owners, and they don't want them, and the players don't want them, wouldn't tolerate them, so it's not an issue.
Fans, it's up to you. Tell the big league magnates that you're sick of the poor pitching American League. You want to see Satchel Paige out there on the mound. You're tired of the flop teams like Boston, of the silly Brooklyn Dodgers, of the inept Philadelphia Phillies, and the semi-pro Athletics. Demand better ball. Demand Americanism in baseball. Equal opportunities for Negro and white. Demand the end of Jim Crow baseball. August 18th, 1936.
I was in the Yankee dressing room, and one of the other sports writers asked Joe, who's the best pitcher you've faced? Thinking in terms of big league, of course, in his year and a half. And young Joe DiMaggio, said without hesitation, Satchel Paige, who he had played against in postseason exhibition games on the West Coast. So he answered the question honestly, The next day I had a big headline, Paige, greatest I've faced, ... DiMaggio, and none of the other papers had that.
Let the winners of the World Series play us just one game at Yankee Stadium, and if we don't beat them, they don't have to pay us.
That was the challenge thrown down yesterday by Satchel Paige, brilliant Negro pitcher at the unwritten Jim Crow restriction that keeps him and other Negro baseball players from their rightful place in America's national pastime. Paige didn't make that statement boastfully. It was made with a quiet confidence backed by the records.
No all-star team of major leaguers has ever beaten a Negro League team playing on the Pacific Coast after the season. And they had some ball players trying. Joe DiMaggio, Charlie Gehringer, Dizzy Dean. There must be something wrong somewhere.
September 16th, 1937.
In addition to highlighting the Negro players, which was our first task, we did several other things. We stimulated a petition campaign. And that was young people, trade unionists and young communists, outside the three big league ballparks in New York whenever they had a game. And they weren't trying to keep people out, They just wanted them to sign a petition. And the petition said roughly, would you be willing to have the Yankees or the Giants or the Dodgers sign a Negro player if he were able to make the team? After a year and a half, we had more than 1.5 million petition signatures on Judge Landis's desk.
These players could make champions out of the also-rans in either league. But they are Negroes, and organized baseball says they cannot play. But no voter's ever taken on the subject. No manager or owner dares to defy the Jim Crow tradition, which has been the most inflexible, unwritten law in the game. May 14th, 1940.
We had almost a daily feature, Can You Read Judge Landis? And we'd run the box scores showing that more fans attended a black game in Chicago than the white doubleheader. Can you see Judge Landis? I'd show a picture of Satchel Paige, arguably one of the 3 best pitchers this country has ever produced. Can you hear Judge Landis? And this is what the crowds were roaring, marching that through the streets. End Jim Crow in baseball, We kept a steady drumbeat on Landis, and he was rankled by it. Everybody who had any contact with him and who tried to raise this subject knows that he was a stone racist. He refused to talk about it. He said, that's not part of my job. I don't care one way or the other, but as far as I'm concerned, baseball is a white game.
Time for stalling is over, Judge Landis. Negro soldiers and sailors are among the beloved heroes of the American people who have died for the preservation of this country and everything this country stands for. Yes, including the great game of baseball. You may file this away without comment, as you already have to the petitions of more than 1 million baseball fans. You may ignore it as you have ignored the clear statements of the men who play our national pastime and the men who manage the teams. You have refused to acknowledge sports columns and editorials in newspapers throughout the country. The Louisville Courier-Journal last month joined the nationwide demand for the end of Jim Crow in our national pastime and said, baseball, in this war, should set an example for democracy. May 6th, 1942.
Every year at the start of a season, I'd send a questionnaire to every big league owner. Would you be willing to sign a qualified Negro for your team, and so on. The first positive answer I got was from Bill Benswanger, the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Part of that, I surmise, was that Pittsburgh was actually the heart of black baseball at that time with the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Couriers. Wendell Smith, the sports editor of the Courier, estimates that there were 6 players on those 2 teams that were potentially all-star caliber in the big leagues. They included Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige, Buck Leonard, the first baseman, and Ray Dandridge, the third baseman. Effa Manley, the owner of the Newark Black Eagles, she spoke to me after the campaign was in full swing, and she said kind of bitterly, she said, you people are doing no service to us. You're going to put out of business maybe the best black business in the country, a going concern that uses thousands of black people to work on the ballparks. And she said, you're going to end that if you end the segregation. And she was right, of course. It did put a great business out of it. But she finally came around to the longer view, which was, how about all the young black kids growing up who wanted a chance to play in the big leagues?
In October 1945, Sergeant Lester Rodney was stationed on a remote South Pacific island when he received a telegram from New York. Congratulations, Dodgers signed Jackie Robinson for their Montreal Farm Club. You did it.
The New York Times ran the headlines of the opening day, April 15th, 1947, the cloudy April afternoon when Jackie made his debut. In truth, if someone wanted to know the full story of the ending of discrimination and how it was being coped with, they would have to turn to the Daily Worker or the Negro weeklies. Dick Young at the Daily News came over to me. He says, you know me, you know I hate the guts of communism. He said, but you guys can be proud of this. It was a sort of a conjunction of things. My newfound social passion for justice, including racial justice, and being passionate about baseball. If you love something enough, you want it to be perfect. You don't want it to be racist. And when you change people in baseball, you change America. Baseball changes America. It was 1948 when President Harry Truman announced the desegregation of the armed forces. That was 1 year after Jackie Robinson desegregated America's national pastime. That was no accident. I was just chatting with Leo DeRocha one day before a game, and Leo suddenly turns to me and says, Rodney says, for a communist, you sure know your baseball. I took it as a compliment.